Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. Welcome to the new week. It's Monday, the 22nd of June, 2020, and this is the Meet the Farmers podcast with me, Ben Eagle. I've got a real treat in store for you today with today's guest, and I really enjoyed having an expectedly wide-ranging discussion with him one evening last week about all things countryside. Yes, rural commentator and chartered surveyor Rob Yorke is on the podcast. We'll also be playing this week's round of Guess the Crop and looking back on the farming and countryside news stories from the past week. So let's start the show.
In the news.
In the news this week, more than 1 million people have now signed the petition organised by the NFU urging the government not to undermine British production standards by allowing lower quality food imports into Britain. Writing in his Sunday Times column, Jeremy Clarkson has been particularly vocal in his views as to what will happen when the basic payment is phased out and British farmers are forced to compete in an unfair way with producers from abroad for the British food market. The NFU hopes to continue the petition and to continue discussions at DEFRA. The impact of the floods earlier in the year lives on, with a further £6 million being provided by the government to help farmers who were affected by the floods. This means farmers and landowners in parts of Herefordshire, Shropshire, Worcestershire, Gloucestershire, Staffordshire, Nottinghamshire and North and East Yorkshire. So if you live in any of those areas, look into that. You can apply for between £500 and £25,000 under the Farming Recovery Fund. The human world might be focused on coronavirus right now, but in the avian world, the UK is now officially disease-free from avian influenza H5N3, although DEFRA's chief veterinary officer is still urging all keepers of poultry to remain vigilant. Something incredible has happened in the beef market since the 20th of May, with prices at their highest level now for over a year, rising by about 40 pence a kilo in just 6 weeks. The reasons are broad, but partly down to supermarkets promoting the whole carcass and, of course, barbecue weather helping retail demand for prime cuts, which were struggling earlier in the lockdown. Finally, there's slightly disappointing news for arable farmers as UK crops forecasts for wheat, winter barley, spring barley and oilseed rape are showing yields to all be below the 5-year average due to the continued dry weather. But of course, this only talks of yield, and we'll wait to see how it impacts on bottom lines. And that is the news for now.
In the news.
It's now time for today's interview feature, which is with a non-farmer today, but somebody who has been heavily involved in rural commentary for several years, has written multiple letters to the Times, and has interviewed several leading figures in the world of food, farming and the environment. Yes, today I'm speaking to Twitter's Black Gull, rural commentator and chartered surveyor, Rob Yorke.
Meet the farmer's friends.
So I first got to know my guest today through Twitter shortly after starting my blog way back in 2013. Seems a lifetime ago now. He shares my interest in rural communities and also particularly in bringing seemingly disparate groups together to talk about common ground. Yes, I am thrilled tonight to be speaking to Rob Yorke on the line direct from the Black Mountains. Rob is a rural commentator and chartered surveyor, and you might know him as Black Gull on Twitter. He's lived in many of the wilder parts of the UK, such as Argyll, Cumbria, Snowdonia, the Black Mountains, and Shepherd's Bush. He commentates, chairs, project manages pipeline schemes, brokers conversations. He's written 122 letters to date in the Times. He's interviewed Michael Gove, George Monbiot, Ben Goldsmith, Minette Batters. He seeks to provoke dialogue between environmentalists, farmers, hunters, rewilders, foresters, naturalists, gamekeepers, and scientists. There is a brief introduction, but there is a lot to this man, and I'm absolutely thrilled to have him on. Rob, it's really great to have you on here. Finally, although keen-eared listeners who've gone back through the episodes might remember you from previous Oxford episodes. I acutely remember a particularly good joint OFC ORFC cider tasting.
Yes, Ben, Thank you for reminding me of that. And also thank you for your introduction, and thank you for inviting me on to this very famous Meet the Farmers, because I've got to confess I'm not a farmer. I think we have had, kind of previous discussions at various events, and they've always been spicy, they've always been animated, and they've always been wide-ranging. And so it's up to you, and this is a real joy to be on the opposite side. It's up to you to chair me very harshly.
A challenge, perhaps. We'll see. So you've asked to talk about a number of topics tonight, which we will go through. But I wonder if you could start by introducing yourself in terms of what you do, both your day job, which is perhaps easier to describe, but also your writing and commentating, which is the thing that many listeners, especially if they're on Twitter, may know you for.
Well, thanks for that. I want to put this into a very small piece, because I don't think people are that interested in me. It's more about the stuff that I'm talking about. But I suppose a little bit of context, and I've always talked about context is important. I was born down in the New Forest, brought up on the west of Scotland, the west of England, and the west of Wales, and now live in southeast Wales in the Black Mountains. I'm definitely a rural kid, but spent a bit of time in Shepherd's Bush. And I was commuting from town out to Hertfordshire. I mean, my old man, he was kind of forest commission, and that's why we moved around to the west of mainly the west part of the UK. So I'm very used to midges and woodland, and also arguing and debating, and that's something that I think my dad really put into me at some of those early doors.
You trained as a rural surveyor at the REU, then the RAC. Tell me about those days and how it led on to your rural surveyor career.
Well, I've got a slight confession in that I wasn't going to go to the Royal Agricultural University, or the RAC as it was then. I was going to go and do zoology and geography combined honours at Newcastle University.
I did not know this.
Yeah. Well, I didn't really tell my parents either. And I basically went and spent a bit more time traveling around, and then I decided actually the rural land management degree run at Reading University but hosted at the Royal Agricultural College or University, whatever, was actually going to provide more ability for me to earn stuff in the future. So that's where I went.
Okay.
And it was an interesting place, possibly a little bit narrow as to the range of people in an institution.
A bit. And I'm also really interested in your writing influences. Have you always enjoyed writing?
Yeah, I have to just say that I think I probably obfuscate. What does that mean, actually? I actually confuse myself sometimes. I think sometimes find it quite hard to kind of keep track of how I present things. So I think when I'm writing letters, and I have always written stuff when I was small. I remember picking up Hemingway's book, The Big Two-Hearted River, and that is an evocative piece of writing. It's not his big stuff. It's not Hemingway's kind of big stuff. It's wonderfully evocative stuff about being out in the wilds. And of course, I liked a bit of the kind of John Buchan, because that's what I am originally, though it's quite hard to express it in the modern parlance. I'm a hunter-naturalist, or a naturalist hunter, a conservationist hunter, outdoor backwoodsman, whatever you want to call it. And so I've always enjoyed trying to put that into words. And, writing is very cathartic as well. And I like writing.
And that links into communications generally, which you use communications in quite a broad way. What does communications mean to you? And again, where does that interest come from?
I think communication just comes back to speaking with people, liking dealing with people. I remember speaking to a solicitor, and he said, no, I like being a solicitor because I don't need to speak to people. I just write a formal letter. And I thought, hang on. I don't think that was the turning point, but it was definitely the idea that I like talking with people. learning stuff from them, body language as well. So that's why face to
Yep.
face, okay, this is Zoom to Zoom. Actually, 25 years of being a rural surveyor, working on pipelines, project management, troubleshooting, dealing with ecologists and solicitors and farmers and members of the public and other land agents and a whole spectrum. And that, I suppose, just made me work out that communications are pretty damn important.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if we get them right half the time.
Yeah. Common ground is a term that you've used a lot in the past. It's a term that we've discussed a lot together in the past. What does common ground mean to you?
Common ground can take you to more nuanced spaces. You've got a spider's web, and I think there's a lot more in common than we dare admit to. It's not an easy terrain to traverse, the common ground. It's pretty unpopular because, of course, if you're in common ground, that means you're not in the partisan trenches and you're in no man's land. But then, that's what this is about, is being a bit braver in some of our discussions.
Yeah. Can you give me a couple of examples of, you mentioned Oxford farming and Oxford real farming. Take me into some of the events, means perhaps some of your hay events.
Okay, so here's one. I had the head of the Soil Association and I had a poultry farmer,
Yeah.
high tech, and I said to the head of the Soil Association, you're an organic farmer, okay? You're not head of the Soil Association. Poultry farmer, intensive, indoor. What I wanted was the audience, who may not have known about all of these bits and pieces, to learn that actually those different views from the speakers did have common ground, but it's quite hard to tease them out if it's done in a traditional way of saying, who are you? Where's your label? Who do you represent? And so what comes with it is the baggage, the ideology, whereas by framing it and letting people talk in a different way, the audience could discover stuff that they had in common.
That's an interesting segue into our next topic, which is the agriculture bill, which in essence is the largest change to the rural context in terms of policy for a generation. What is your take on it so far? So, I mean, to date, where we are now is that it's sitting in the Lords. It had its first sort of session in the Lords last week, and we're moving into committee stage. What's your take on it?
Yeah, Ben, I mean, this is a huge rabbit hole we could go down, and I'm no expert on it, and I'm not quite sure who is an expert on it because, and I say this because basically the UK is coming down off subsidies. In the land management, farming, the UK countryside has been linked to subsidies via the CAP, Common Agricultural Policy, for years now, and we're coming down off that. And I'm almost using the kind of off heavy drugs, and it almost is like that. And that's why I'm finding it quite intriguing how many experts have popped up saying, right, this is how we did it, this is how we need to do it now. I like the ag bill, but I'm not liking the way it's being presented because I think there's a lot more complexity in it. And I read the Schedule 1, I think it is, and it talks about productivity. And for me, that's very interesting. It's not about production. And how often do we hear productivity and production conflated? The other thing is food security. And I remember being at the Oxford Farming Conference, and my question in the press room was not asked. My question was, are you not conflating food security with food self-sufficiency? And I think the Secretary of State probably was, but she didn't want to say so, because everything is very febrile at the minute. And there are so many questions, and there are so many difficult areas to discuss, all within a small, condensed time frame, that I think the Ag Bill has some way to run. I know people want it to be public goods, but I can see it as public goods as well as productivity for improving food production and soils. And it's all there, but the way it's framed, it's slightly either or. And I think we could look for that complexity, and I think it could be better framed. But again, who owns that framework, I think, is the key thing. And I think the government could help a lot more on that, not just leave it to the NFU, not leave it to the RSPB to say it's all about public goods. It's all of it.
Yeah, I mean, the term land manager has been bandied about a lot recently.
Yeah.
Do you think? Do you see any utility in that? And do you think that farmers will actually go as far as ever calling themselves?
I don't think they will, but I think they
managers?
have to, because kind of primary industries, farming, horticulture, aquaculture, agriculture, but it's farmers, offence is not a defence. Don't be offended by being called a land manager if you provide wider, thick hedgerows that provide more insects, that provide then more stone curlews, that at the same time you plant more trees, and at the same time that you produce better wheat for Weetabix, and all of these. And then, you've opened your farm on Open Farm Sunday, and you've got public access, and you've got information. All of that, I would argue, is land managing as well as being a farmer. You might have a solar farm, which is farming sunshine, etc. The farmers club, I accept, would not sound very good as the land managers club, and you don't need a tie. but I think, come on, get real, because farmers have always been told, farm for the market. And if the market is demanding land managers, don't be prissy over it.
I want to turn the conversation towards education, because the subject of having a natural history GCSE or equivalent qualification has been in and out of the news for quite a while. But it seems that once it's been approved for consultation, that we may have, in England at least, a natural history GCSE by 2022. Is that a good idea, do you think?
I have to say that I did invite myself to the launch of it via Zoom.
Oh, yeah.
Even though they couldn't see me, which is probably a good thing. I'm not sure they answered don't think they answered any of my questions, but my main one was, I don't know where I've scribbled it down somewhere, but it was basically, you can't study your nature until you worked out where your food comes from. And that's because I spend a lot of time reading research papers. They're mainly about agriculture, they're about wildlife and conservation. They always start with this line: agriculture is the biggest impactor on wildlife. And I'm going, well, hang on, that's a bit heavy-handed. But actually, if you think about it, organic farming, any kind of farming, means that you have to take land in order to produce food. I would suggest it's worth feeding in to the GCSE. And that's not to just say it should become agriculture, because I know other people want farming to be a GCSE. And I think another organization has just asked for the countryside code to be part of the education system. So all of these are kind of melded into one. And I would call it, natural countryside sciences.
Something that connects food and the natural world quite nicely is shooting culture. And it's something that you talk a great deal about shooting and shooting culture itself. How healthy is shooting communications right now?
Oh, okay. I would say that, if someone prods you very hard indeed, and keeps prodding you in the chest right towards the corner, I would suggest that you don't bring out your best arguments. That's me saying I don't think there's a very healthy discussion around shooting, but that's not shooting's fault. It's because it's become a totemic subject. And that's not just because people go out and shoot wood pigeons, or they haven't got general license to do that, whatever. I mean, goodness knows where we stand now. But, you've got wildfowling, you've got rough shooting for rabbits, you've got driven grouse shooting, which of course is very
there's a whole other subject.
Yeah, there is, which is related to uplands, and I think we might touch on uplands.
Yeah, absolutely.
But this is where I've always split the difference between public opinion and public benefit. So undoubtedly, and there was a wonderful report from 2010, Report 40, produced by the Game Conservancy and the RSPB. It was never published, but I managed to get hold of it, and I have published it because it had all this lovely common ground about well-managed shooting does great stuff for the environment. What's not to like? But of course, if you're going to focus on bad practices, and you could focus on bad practices of organic farming, of anything you wanted to, and discover that it's not good for the land, etc. Of course, there's good stuff. And I have written about shooting, and I think I write about shooting and the stuff it can do, because people have become very tribal about it. You either shoot or you don't shoot. And that loses the grey area about where there is the common ground between a gamekeeper who looks after stone curlews, and that's been written about in the RSPB magazine. I have posted that, and those people who don't shoot but provide habitat for others to shoot over it. And rewilding has common ground between hunting. I like the word hunting in the European sense, the American sense, hunting wild game, rather than, I think, and I'm starting to waffle here, but the UK has a very traditional backdrop to shooting, Edwardian, double guns. And I think we could possibly lose some of that to have a much healthier conversation.
You also write about fishing, and you're a keen fisherman yourself. You wrote a book, which I didn't know this until I looked at this. You wrote a book called The A to Z of Fishing for W.H. Smith in 2004.
I did, yes. Someone asked me to do it after a game of football. They said, "Look, Rob, we know you're cheap as chips. You can whiz off a few words on fishing." Wait, I think I've got a copy. Funny enough, just over here.
Ah.
Here it is. I won't go. There it is. The 8 of angling. But on a serious note, I mean, this is quite shooting. I love fishing. I love angling. I'm a member of the Wild Trout Trust. I'm a life member of the Game Wildlife Conservation Trust. I'm a member of the RSPB. I'm a member of the British Trust for Ornithology. Member of Bug Life. A member of Basque. Member of blah blah blah. The point I'm saying is that I love fishing. I have lots of fishing friends. But I'm also aware of the conflict between clean water and other land uses. But I love fishing, and again, but it's like shooting. Those people who are looking after rivers are looking after great environments, but there are also lots of interfaces with other land uses, i.e., kind of diffuse kind of pollution. And I can't escape some of those wicked problems, which I think we could talk about in a much more honest and open way. But I think, as John Buchan said, time spent fishing is time not wasted.
Let's switch the microphone around. You've interviewed quite a lot of people. Who stands out in that number? Always a difficult question.
I tell you what, it's quite interesting being interviewed because, of course, however much you prepare, you don't have the answers that you want to suddenly give beautifully, eruditely, straight off the tongue. It sounds so good, the right intonation and all that stuff. So this is good for me to have role reversal, because I've sometimes been rather smug saying, well, I like to interview these people because I can throw them some curveballs. And I suppose, I mean, you've named the people that I've interviewed, kind of Gove Butters and some others, etc., Ben Goldsmith and, Dr. Debbie Hughes, Dr. Fu, very interesting. Yeah, I mean, of course, they've all got lots to say. The key thing is to tease out the stuff they don't want to say.
How long have you been tweeting for? And has the way that you've tweeted over time changed?
It has changed. Of course it's changed. I think my first tweet was something like, "Is there anybody out there?" on Twitter. Countryside. What a mad thing to write. I mean, you wouldn't know that now. I mean, talk about Moore's law. Things exponentially increase every year. Though I'm not going to be particularly complimentary about social media, because I feel that we have, in many areas, reached peak protagonist, in that people who are on social media, it's the same suspects, it's the same voices, they've got position statements, they're not really going to change them. One of the people I really admire died in a wildfire in, I think, 1948. Aldo Leopold, great,
of course,
conservation forester, hunter, etc. And why I really do admire him is that he changed his mind all through his career. He was curious, inquisitive, he changed his mind, he did U-bends, U-turns. He was always questioning himself, questioning other people. He probably wasn't popular. And I think Twitter is not a place for any nuanced debate. It has its value. And I'm talking about Twitter maybe because I know there's Facebook and there's Instagram and there's lots of other social media kind of platforms, and they've all got a role. But I think the danger is, and I remember reading this book, it was called The End of Absence. And it was all about the dangers of the internet. And I read it about 8 years ago. My wife said, "I think you've just ignored most of it." And one line that jumped out at me was, "Technology is there to make your life easier. It's up to you to recognize it." i.e. to recognize what changes are happening, how it's modifying your behavior and things like that. So it's, I like using kind of social media as a finger on the pulse to see what people are thinking and saying. Got to take it with a huge pinch of salt. I think the internet generally is a very horrid place to seek information, because if you use a search engine, let's say, for example, pollinators and bees, you will just get a whole lot of a campaign coming up on the first page of Google rather than any balanced debate. So we're all subject to echo chambers. We've all got our own confirmation bias. I think we've just got to be much smarter at recognizing it and knowing when to switch off.
Tell me about Reconciliation Countryside Services, because this sort of brings together everything that you do.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoy having the debate and being, let's say, vaguely provocative, but at the same time, people say, get off the fence. What are you? Because if you're not with me, that means you're against me. And I don't agree with that, because every argument has kind of nuance and has different views. Yeah, I remember chairing a debate. I was suddenly asked to chair this debate. There was an MP there. There were all these scientists. There were some campaigners. And it was all about pollinators. And I was asked, will you just kind of look after the running of the agenda? And I looked at the agenda and I ripped it up and I said, right, before the MP leaves, we all need to go around the room and have 60 seconds on what you love and know about pollinators. But please take your label off and do not say for whom you work. And it worked. Everybody just provided stuff without saying for who they were. There was no kind of perception about for who you were would then, influence what you were going to say. So you didn't know who was who. And of course, we did an event, didn't we, Ben, a long time ago for, was it Young Naturalists? Yeah, Young Naturalists and Young.
Yeah, young farmers and a focus on nature.
And that was great fun, because it was about stripping away our kind of ownership of the discussion, of the debate, and just bringing the value as to what we know. And it was, I enjoyed, was it last year, doing some work behind the scenes with some government organizations to kind of just to pass on views that might not always be in the public domain. So the kind of stuff that I want to do more of is to provide neutral spaces so that people with different values can find that common ground. And I think there are ways that we can do it, but it's not the way that we have done it.
It is. It's a particularly strange year for multiple reasons, and certainly not one that any of us thought that we were going to be going into. How has the lockdown impacted on you, your work, your way of life?
Well, I'm getting slightly mad, but then but I mean, everyone has been. Yes, these are unusual circumstances because us humans as a whole are social animals. Albeit we do a lot of our social activity online. I'll be really honest, for me directly, I've been catching up on a lot of work. I've been hunkering down here in the hills. I've been doing some walking, feeding the hens, feeding the kids. I almost forgot the kids there. We've got the homeschooling, which is difficult because the online. We haven't got the broadband, which is working now, which is great, but we definitely don't have fiber. So it's been a lot harder for lots of other people. But I do fear that the new online communications may not be ideal, because we need to hug people. And I don't mean professionally, but we do need to hug people. And I mean, we need to shake hands, which may be difficult. And I think we need to be able to read the body language face to face. So I think walking and talking in wide open, fresh air spaces is possibly a great way to have lots of these discussions that you and I, Ben, have been having about stuff where there's lots of common ground, and also lots of areas where there's lots of tensions, which we've kind of touched on. I think if we can be brave enough, we can, and I've said that before using the word kind of brave. But there are new ways, to reframe some of these narratives. And maybe now is a good chance, to throw everything and disrupt things for the right reason.
I think that is the mic drop moment. So, Rob, thank you so much for coming on the show, giving us your thoughts on on an incredibly wide range of topics. I realise that this is going to be a bit of an editing nightmare, but I'm really pleased that we have managed to go through, because we just don't do that enough generally. Because when it comes to the countryside, you can't, in my view, you can't really talk about these things in isolation. Yes, we've taken them one by one, but they are all connected at the same time.
Ben, I just got to say, first of all, thank you very much for having me on. And I do apologize. Having said at the start, I will just be pithy, like my Times letter, keep them pithy and pertinent to the point. I have rambled, I have gone here, I have gone there, but I think this kind of reflects how convoluted, how cross disciplinary, I can hardly say the word, but there are so many kind of different land uses, different management issues that we've been talking about, and there's no way of just putting it into simple silos and talking about it. So this has been a bit of a ramble, and if people have got confused, that's just how it is. But there was one quote which I did discover recently.
Brilliant.
And again, I don't think it doesn't really matter who actually said it, but it's basically, never tell people how to do things, tell them what to do, and they will surprise you with their ingenuity. I like that. That was a US Army general in Second World War, George Patton.
Super. We will leave it there. Rob Yorke, thank you very much. Thanks for coming on the show.
It's been great fun. Many thanks, Ben.
Meet the farmer's friends.
Rob Yorke, who you can follow on Twitter at Black Gull. That conversation went on for at least another half an hour, and you can find that on YouTube. Just search for Meet the Farmers Podcast, Rob Yorke. There were questions on all sorts of other things, from trees to rewilding and walking. Before we go, it's time to play Guess the Crop.
Time to guess the crop. Just tell me what the type of crop is.
Yes, this is Guess the Crop, the mini game show in which I give you 3 clues for a crop of some kind, and all you have to do is message me your answer at mtf_podcast on Twitter or Instagram, or email me thinkingcountry@gmail.com. At the end of the year, the person with the most correct answers will receive a prize, which will be posted to them. You can play at any time, and to get answers from previous shows, just go back through the episodes and send me all your answers at once. I think it's something like episode 73 where they start. So what is today's crop? Your clues are: number 1, this plant is native to Western Asia, Europe and North Africa. 2, the fruits of this plant are known as seeds. And 3, the seeds have a strong anise-type flavour and smell. So message me your answer to mtf_podcast or email thinkingcountry@gmail.com.
Time to guess the crop. Just tell me what the type of crop is.
That's all we have time for today, but thank you very much for listening. Please subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already done so, and tell others about the show if you think they'd enjoy it or get something from it. Thank you very, very much to my guest today, Mr. Rob Yorke, and to the show supporters, the Mercer Family Charitable Foundation. Next time, I'll be speaking to food journalist Jez Fredenberg, so I hope you can join me then. In the meantime, have a great week, and I'll see you next time on Meet the Farmers.